It looks harmless. A simple newspaper ad from the late 1800s. A splash of text. A few bold claims. Nothing that screams revolution. Nothing that hints at the global empire it would create. But this tiny piece of printed paper would change the world. It was the first advertisement for a drink no one had heard of yet. A drink called Coca-Cola. Today, that name feels eternal. It's painted on billboards in over 200 countries. It sponsors world events. It sits on tables from New York to Nairobi. It's been poured into billions of glasses. But in 1886, Coca-Cola was just an idea, and a desperate one at that. Because this wasn't just a story about a new beverage. It was a story about survival, about addiction, about ambition, and about how a secret recipe, a pharmacist with a dream, and a well-placed ad would ignite a cultural phenomenon that refuses to die, even when the truth tried to kill it. So let's rewind to Atlanta, Georgia. Spring of 1886. A man named Dr. John Stith Pemberton sat in his small pharmacy, staring at a problem that was as old as humanity itself: pain. Pemberton was a Civil War veteran. He'd been injured in battle, and like thousands of other veterans, he had turned to morphine to dull the agony. But morphine didn't just dull the pain. It chained him. He became an addict. And he wasn't alone. In post-war America, addiction ran rampant. Morphine was the silent plague of the age. Doctors prescribed it freely. Patients begged for it desperately. And pharmacists like Pemberton were caught in the middle, searching for something, anything, to ease suffering without destroying lives. Pemberton wanted a solution. Something legal. Something marketable. Something that could make him rich, and maybe save him too. He began experimenting, mixing herbs, spices, extracts, looking to Europe for inspiration. That's when he discovered something called Vin Mariani, a French tonic made with wine and coca leaves. It was a sensation in Europe, advertised as a cure for fatigue, depression, and even impotence. The secret? Cocaine. At the time, cocaine wasn't illegal. It wasn't even controversial. It was considered a medical marvel, a wonder drug for energy and focus. So Pemberton thought, why not make my own version? He blended coca leaves with wine, added caffeine-rich cola nut extract, and created a drink he called French wine coca. It was bold. It was bitter. And it was addictive in every sense of the word. For a while, it worked. French wine coca became popular among the elite of Atlanta. Pemberton sold it as a nerve tonic, a mood enhancer, a miracle cure. But then, America changed overnight. In 1886, Atlanta passed prohibition laws banning the sale of alcohol. Wine was out, and so was Pemberton's miracle drink. His business was collapsing. His health was failing. His morphine addiction was tightening its grip. He had one shot left. Reinvent the formula, fast. So he went back to his lab. He stripped out the wine, kept the coca leaves, kept the cola nut, added sugar, mixed it with carbonated water. And something happened. Something unexpected. The bitterness softened. The flavor danced. The bubbles brought it to life. This wasn't just a tonic anymore. This was refreshing, addictive, delicious. Pemberton took a sip, and the world shifted. He had just created Coca-Cola. But a recipe is worthless without a market. Pemberton needed people to buy it, to crave it, to spread the word. So he wrote an ad. A simple ad. It ran in the Atlanta Journal on May 29, 1886. It read, Coca-Cola. Delicious, refreshing, exhilarating, invigorating. The new and popular soda fountain drink contains the properties of the wonderful coca plant and the famous cola nuts. 5 words leapt off the page: delicious, refreshing, exhilarating, invigorating. Here, a promise wrapped in ink. A promise that would build an empire. But here's the twist. That first ad wasn't just selling a drink. It was selling a lie. Because Coca-Cola wasn't just a soda. It was a stimulant, packed with cocaine and caffeine. A chemical handshake designed to hook you. And it worked. People loved it. People needed it. The first year, Pemberton sold just 9 drinks a day. But word spread. The craving spread. And with every glass poured, the addiction grew. What Pemberton didn't know was that his invention would outlive him. That it would survive lawsuits, scandals, wars, and boycotts. That it would become a weapon in the battle for global markets. A symbol of freedom in some countries, a symbol of oppression in others. He didn't know Coca-Cola would one day sponsor the Olympics, colonize supermarkets, and pump billions into advertising campaigns that rewired human desire. He didn't know it would shape culture, politics, even wars. He didn't know because he wouldn't live to see it. But we'll get to that. Because this is not just the story of a drink. It's the story of how marketing became a religion. How addiction was dressed up as refreshment. How a single ad in a small-town paper set the stage for the most powerful brand on earth. And it starts with a man who wanted to escape his own demons and ended up creating everyone else's. Ready for the next part? Because what comes next is darker, stranger, and more shocking than the ad itself. John Stith Pemberton didn't look like a revolutionary. He wasn't a tycoon. He wasn't a marketing genius. He wasn't even a healthy man. He was a broken soldier with a bottle of morphine by his bed and a dream that wouldn't let him go. Born in 1831 in Knoxville, Georgia, Pemberton grew up in the shadow of the American South's turmoil. He trained as a pharmacist, studying chemistry and medicine. He believed in science. He believed in progress. But life had other plans. During the Civil War, he served as a lieutenant colonel in the Confederate Army. And in 1865, at the Battle of Columbus, he was slashed across the chest by a Union saber. The wound nearly killed him. It didn't kill him, but it left him in agony. Pain became his shadow, and like so many others, he turned to morphine. The cure became the curse. Addiction sank its teeth deep, and it never let go. By the 1880s, Pemberton was a man living on borrowed time. His health was failing. His finances were a mess. The South was rebuilding, and opportunity was scarce. But his mind, still sharp, still hungry, and still obsessed with one thing, finding a way out. He had seen how patent medicines, so-called miracle tonics, were sweeping the country. They promised everything: vitality, youth, relief from female troubles, even cures for alcoholism. Most were snake oil, but they sold. And in those bottles was Pemberton's chance. He had tried French wine coca. It was good. Too good to die with prohibition. He believed he could reinvent it, make it legal, make it thrive. He just needed the right mix. Here's what he had: coca leaves for energy and mood, cola nuts for caffeine and stamina, sugar for taste, and the new magic of the age, carbonation. Soda fountains were the Starbucks of their time. Social hubs where ideas flowed like seltzer water. If Pemberton could get his drink behind one of those counters, he could print money. But what he also had was a ticking clock. His debts were piling up. His addiction was worse. His competitors were ruthless. He needed something more than a recipe. He needed a story. And that's where the real genius began. Because Coca-Cola wasn't born in a bottle. It was born in an ad. May 29th, 1886. The Atlanta Journal. A small square of text that whispered promises louder than any preacher in town. Delicious, refreshing, exhilarating, invigorating. These weren't just adjectives. They were spells. Spells designed to make readers lean in and imagine something more than a drink. Imagine an experience. It worked. Slowly at first. 9 drinks a day, then 12, then 25. Not enough to get rich. Not yet, but enough to see a spark. Enough to know he was onto something. And this is where the story twists. Because the man who invented Coca-Cola would never live to see it become Coca-Cola. Pemberton, the dreamer, the chemist, the addict, was about to lose everything. He sold portions of his formula to investors for quick cash, just to pay for morphine. He mortgaged his future one fraction at a time until nothing was left. In 1888, broke and sick, Pemberton died. His net worth? Practically nothing. His creation? About to explode without him. Enter Asa Griggs Candler. If Pemberton was the inventor, Candler was the architect. The man who would turn a formula into a fortune. The man who would weaponize advertising in ways the world had never seen. The man who would make Coca-Cola not just a drink, but a culture. And how he did it. That's where the story gets dark. Because Coca-Cola wasn't built on refreshment alone. It was built on obsession, on desire, on a calculated seduction that rewired America's brain, one sip at a time. Are you ready to see how far they went to make you thirsty? Because the next chapter isn't about sweetness. It's about power. When Asa Griggs Candler stepped into the story, Coca-Cola stopped being a pharmacy experiment and started becoming a machine. Candler wasn't a chemist. He wasn't a doctor. He was a businessman, and not just any businessman. He was ruthless, relentless, and visionary in a way the Gilded Age adored. He bought the formula from Pemberton's estate for what would amount to about $2,300 today. A bargain so obscene it feels like theft. But for Candler, it wasn't about owning a drink. It was about owning a future, and he was willing to bend every rule to make that happen. Candler understood something most didn't. Coca-Cola wasn't just a product. It was a promise of energy, a promise of health, a promise of happiness in a glass. And people in the 1880s were desperate for promises. They were exhausted from war, sick of disease, crushed by industrial labor. If Candler could make them believe Coca-Cola was more than sugar and bubbles, he could make them buy forever. So he went to war, not with guns, but with advertising. No brand had ever done what Candler was about to do. He didn't just run ads in newspapers. He flooded them. He blanketed cities with signs, banners, and slogans. He printed calendars, thermometers, and recipe books with Coca-Cola's name on them and gave them away for free. He understood brand saturation decades before marketers even had a word for it. And then came the real stroke of genius: coupons. Candler invented the concept of the free sample coupon. He mailed them out by the thousands, letting people taste Coca-Cola for nothing. Why? Because he knew something about human nature. Once you tasted it, you'd come back. And you'd bring friends. But here's the part they didn't print on the ads. Coca-Cola still contained cocaine. Not much, but enough to make you feel it. Enough to make you crave it. Enough to make the word invigorating more than just a slogan. Pair that with caffeine and sugar, and you had a legal, socially acceptable stimulant disguised as refreshment. People didn't just like Coca-Cola. They needed it. By 1895, Candler declared Coca-Cola was available in every state in the U.S. Think about that. In less than a decade, a local curiosity became a national obsession. And it wasn't just because of taste. It was because Candler turned desire into infrastructure. He built bottling partnerships, distribution networks, supply chains. He created loyalty not just among customers, but among retailers, soda fountain owners, entire cities. But power breeds secrecy. And as Coca-Cola grew, so did the myths. What was really in it? Why did it feel so good? Why did people joke about it being addictive? The company leaned into mystery. They branded the formula as Merchandise Number 7 and locked it in a vault. They told the world it was proprietary, magical, irreplaceable. They turned a recipe into legend. And yet, behind the curtain, cracks were forming. Reformers were rising. Scientists were asking questions about cocaine. Politicians were listening. And the press? Hungry for scandal. Coca-Cola was about to face its first existential threat, the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. Would they survive? Would they admit the truth? Or would they lie to keep the cash flowing? The answer changed everything. And it set the stage for one of the most controversial chapters in advertising history. Do you want to know how Coca-Cola erased cocaine from its formula? And why the myth never really went away? That's coming next. By the early 1900s, Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink anymore. It was an institution. It had woven itself into American life. Families ordered it at lunch counters. Couples shared it on dates. It was the taste of modernity, optimism, progress. But progress has a price, and Coca-Cola was about to pay it. The world was changing, science was advancing, and reformers were on a mission to clean up America's food and drug industry. For decades, patent medicines had ruled the marketplace. Bottles filled with alcohol, opiates, and exotic chemicals sold as cures for everything from headaches to heartbreak. People were dying. People were addicted. And the government could no longer look away. Enter the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, a landmark law that demanded honesty in labeling. No more hiding ingredients. No more mystery formulas. And suddenly, Coca-Cola's greatest strength, its secret recipe, was a liability. Because inside that formula was a ticking bomb: cocaine. By then, medical opinion had shifted. Cocaine was no longer the glamorous, miracle drug of the 1880s. It was a public menace. Newspapers ran lurid headlines about cocaine fiends committing crimes. Doctors warned of its dangers. Politicians saw votes in cracking down. And Coca-Cola, with Coca in its name, was a target painted in red. Asa Candler panicked. Quietly, he ordered changes. By 1904, the company began using spent coca leaves. Leaves that had most of their cocaine extracted before being added to the syrup. But traces remained, and critics pounced. The government accused Coca-Cola of selling an unsafe product. Religious groups called it immoral. Competitors whispered rumors that the drink was corrupting America's youth. And then, in 1911, the fight went to court. The case was United States versus 40 barrels and 20 kegs of Coca-Cola, a name as dramatic as the trial itself. Federal agents seized shipments of syrup, claiming Coca-Cola was adulterated, misbranded, and harmful. Not just because of coca, but because of caffeine. Yes, caffeine. The very ingredient that gave Coca-Cola its kick became Exhibit A in a battle over public health. The government argued Coca-Cola was addicting children, overstimulating them, turning them into nervous wrecks. It was the first major legal showdown over a soft drink in history. Coca-Cola fought back. Hard. The company hired top lawyers. Scientists testified that caffeine in moderation was harmless. Executives swore the formula was pure. And in the end, Coca-Cola won mostly. The court ruled against a total ban, but the damage was done. Coca-Cola was now a lightning rod for controversy. The verdict didn't end the pressure. It increased it. Reformers doubled down. Newspapers sharpened their knives. And behind closed doors, Coca-Cola made a decision that would shape its future. Get rid of the cocaine. Completely. By the 1920s, the formula was officially cocaine-free, at least in the way the public understood it. But here's the twist. Coca-Cola continued to use coca leaves. Legally. Quietly. They imported tons of them under special government permits, processed in a single authorized plant in New Jersey. The cocaine was extracted and destroyed, or so the company claimed. What remained went into the flavoring base. The name stayed. The mystery deepened. And that secrecy? It wasn't an accident. Coca-Cola realized something profound. People love a secret. They love a myth. This secret formula became marketing gold. They locked it in a vault. They turned it into legend. And they told the world, you can taste it, but you'll never know it. But the cocaine controversy wasn't the last storm Coca-Cola would face. Because as the company buried one secret, it was about to unleash a force even more powerful than any ingredient: the force of advertising. Candler had built the foundation, but a new generation of marketers would weaponize psychology, culture, and desire in ways the world had never seen. Coca-Cola wouldn't just sell a drink. It would sell a lifestyle, a dream, an identity. And in doing so, it would reshape not only the marketplace, but the very idea of happiness. Ready for the next chapter? Because this is where Coca-Cola stops being a product and becomes an empire of the mind. By the 1920s, Coca-Cola had survived scandal. It had dodged legal bullets. It had scrubbed away the cocaine, but not the craving. The formula was still secret. The name still irresistible. And now, With Prohibition sweeping America, Coca-Cola found itself in the perfect storm of opportunity. Think about it. Alcohol was banned. Bars were closing. But people still wanted a drink. Something social, something fun, something that felt like an escape without breaking the law. Coca-Cola was ready to fill that void. And Asa Candler's successors knew exactly how to do it, by selling not just a beverage, but an emotion. The new president of Coca-Cola, Robert Woodruff, understood something fundamental. People don't buy products. They buy feelings. And the feeling Coca-Cola promised was joy. Refreshment wasn't just physical, it was psychological. It was belonging. It was optimism in a glass. So Coca-Cola launched a new kind of campaign. Gone were the heavy medical claims about curing headaches or soothing nerves. In their place came something softer, warmer, more seductive, lifestyle advertising. Beautiful women smiling under sunlit skies. Young couples laughing by soda fountains. Families sharing a bottle after Sunday dinner. Every image whispered the same message. Drink Coca-Cola and life feels better. And then came the slogan that defined an era. The pause that refreshes. For words that turned a drink into a ritual. Not just something you consumed, but something you experienced. Something that gave you permission to stop, breathe, and feel alive. It worked. Sales exploded. Coca-Cola became the drink of the jazz age. The companion of flappers and factory workers alike. It was democratic refreshment, affordable, accessible, aspirational. But Coca-Cola didn't stop there. They saw the power of association. So they linked the brand to moments of celebration. Holidays, vacations, even patriotism. They put Coca-Cola in ballparks and train stations, in diners and department stores. They made sure that wherever happiness happened, Coca-Cola was there too. And then, in 1931, they made a move that would change not just their brand, but Christmas itself. They hired an artist named Haddon Sundblom to create holiday ads featuring Santa Claus. Before that, Santa had been portrayed in all sorts of ways, sometimes thin, sometimes stern, sometimes dressed in brown or green. Sundblom painted him as jolly, round, and dressed in Coca-Cola red. And just like that, Coca-Cola didn't just sell soda. It rewrote cultural tradition. It gave us the Santa we know today. This was the genius of Coca-Cola's advertising machine. It didn't just respond to culture, it created culture. It didn't just sell refreshment, it sold nostalgia, dreams, identity. Every ad was a Trojan horse carrying a simple idea. Coca-Cola equals happiness. And people believed it. They drank it. They passed it down through generations. Because Coca-Cola wasn't just in their hands, it was in their heads. But happiness is a slippery thing. And as the world slid toward chaos, the Great Depression, World War II, Coca-Cola would have to fight to keep its promise alive. It would have to go global. And in doing so, it would cross a line that blurred the boundary between commerce and war. Do you want to know how Coca-Cola became a weapon on the battlefield? And why soldiers called it liquid morale? That's where we're headed next. When World War II erupted, everything changed. Nations mobilized. Economies shifted to war footing. Scarcity became a way of life. Sugar was rationed. Factories were converted to make bullets instead of bottles. Most soft drink companies struggled to survive. But Coca-Cola saw an opportunity. Robert Woodruff, the visionary president of Coca-Cola, made a bold declaration. Every man in uniform gets a Coke for 5 cents, wherever he is, and whatever it costs the company. That wasn't just generosity. It was strategy. Because Woodruff understood something few did at the time. Brands don't just sell products, they sell loyalty. And loyalty built in wartime lasts a lifetime. Coca-Cola convinced the US government to classify its syrup as an essential war supply. Why? Because they argued that Coke boosted troop morale. And the army bought it. Literally. Coca-Cola built bottling plants near battlefronts. They sent technicians, called Coca-Cola colonels, into war zones to keep the supply flowing. While bombs fell, Coke bottles clinked. For soldiers, Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink. It was home in a glass. It was America. It was normalcy in a world gone mad. They drank it in trenches, in foxholes, on airstrips. They wrote letters home asking their families to send Coke. They took photos holding bottles like trophies. And when the war ended, those soldiers carried their taste for Coke back to civilian life. But here's the genius. Coca-Cola didn't just give away soda. It built infrastructure. Those wartime bottling plants. They stayed. In Europe, in Asia, in Africa, Coke followed the troops and then stayed to sell to locals. By the end of the war, Coca-Cola wasn't just an American brand. It was a global force. The red and white logo had crossed oceans, borders, cultures, and it carried with it a message as potent as any flag. Coca-Cola equals freedom. But freedom was complicated. In some countries, Coke was welcomed as a taste of modernity. In others, it was seen as cultural invasion, a sugary ambassador of American capitalism. Anti-Coke protests erupted in France, in India, in parts of the Middle East. But the backlash only fed the myth. Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink anymore. It was a symbol of hope, of hegemony, of the power and the peril of branding. By the 1950s, Coca-Cola was everywhere. On billboards in Berlin, in cafes in Tokyo, on TV screens in New York. It was the drink of soldiers, students, housewives, presidents. It was sweet, fizzy proof that America and American business had won the war. But wars don't end. They just change shape. And Coca-Cola was about to enter a new kind of battle. Not on battlefields, but on grocery shelves. Not with bullets, but with branding. A battle that would pit Coke against a rival so fierce, so relentless, it would spark the most legendary marketing war of the 20th century. Pepsi was coming. And Coca-Cola was about to learn that even giants can bleed. The year was 1975. Coca-Cola was king, the most recognized brand in the world. The red and white wave had washed over every continent. But in the shadows, a challenger was sharpening its weapons. A brand with nothing to lose and everything to gain, Pepsi. Pepsi had been around almost as long as Coke. Born in the 1890s, marketed as the drink for the new generation. But for decades, it trailed behind. It was the runner-up, the second choice, the other cola. And Pepsi hated that. So they did something radical. They turned their weakness into a weapon. If Coca-Cola was tradition, Pepsi would be rebellion. If Coke was comfort, Pepsi would be youth. They launched the Pepsi Generation campaign, a masterstroke of psychology. Instead of talking about taste, Pepsi sold identity. Drink Pepsi, and you weren't just thirsty. You were modern, bold, alive. It worked. Slowly, then suddenly, Pepsi started stealing market share. And then came the moment that changed everything. The Pepsi Challenge. In shopping malls across America, Pepsi set up blind taste tests. 2 unmarked cups. 1 Coke, 1 Pepsi. People sipped. People chose. And the majority picked Pepsi. Cameras rolled. Ads aired. And Coca-Cola, the untouchable giant, looked vulnerable for the first time in a century. Coca-Cola panicked. Boardrooms filled with fear. What if people really liked Pepsi better? What if Coke's magic wasn't the taste, but the myth? The company launched internal studies. And the data confirmed the nightmare. In blind tests, Pepsi often won. So Coca-Cola made a decision that would go down as one of the biggest marketing disasters in history. They changed the formula. In 1985, they launched New Coke, sweeter, smoother, designed to beat Pepsi head-to-head. They spent millions hyping it as the future. Ads declared, the best just got better. And then the backlash hit. Consumers revolted. They didn't want New Coke. They didn't want sweeter. They didn't want better. They wanted their Coke. The original. The taste tied to their childhoods, their memories, their identities. They didn't just reject New Coke. They burned it in protests, hoarded old bottles, flooded Coca-Cola's phone lines with fury. Within 79 days, Coca-Cola surrendered. They brought back the original formula under a new name, Coca-Cola Classic. And sales? They skyrocketed. What looked like failure became a strange kind of triumph. Because New Coke didn't kill the brand. It proved something Coca-Cola could never have bought with ads. That Coke wasn't just a drink. It was an emotional anchor. People didn't love Coke for its taste. They loved it for what it meant. But the cola wars weren't over. Pepsi kept swinging, with Michael Jackson, with Madonna, with ads that screamed choice. Coca-Cola countered with polar bears, with Santa Claus, with slogans that sold nostalgia like bottled time. Billions were spent. Celebrities signed. Commercials turned into cultural events. And the world watched as two companies fought for dominance over something as simple and as powerful as sugar water. Yet while the cola wars raged in the media, another battle was brewing behind the scenes. A battle over something neither company wanted to talk about. A battle over health. Because the same sweetness that sold happiness was now being linked to something darker: obesity, diabetes, disease. And the empire Coca-Cola built on refreshment was about to face a reckoning it couldn't outspend. For a century, Coca-Cola had sold happiness. It had sold joy in a bottle, the pause that refreshes, the taste of life. But happiness has a price, and by the 1990s, the bill came due. Because doctors were sounding alarms. Researchers were publishing studies. And the truth was spreading: sugar kills. Obesity rates were climbing. Diabetes was exploding. Heart disease was ravaging populations. And all fingers pointed to the same culprit: sugary drinks. The very thing Coca-Cola had built its empire on was now public enemy number one. At first, Coca-Cola denied everything. They funded studies to cast doubt on the science. They hired lobbyists to water down regulations. They poured millions into PR campaigns framing soda as part of a balanced lifestyle. If people were overweight, Coca-Cola said, it wasn't the Coke, it was the couch. Exercise more. Burn calories. Don't blame the bottle. They weren't lying. They were spinning. And it worked. At least for a while. Sales stayed strong. Ads kept glowing. Polar bears kept sliding across screens. But cracks were forming. Parents started questioning. Schools began banning soda machines. Health advocates called for warning labels and sugar taxes. And Coca-Cola faced something it had never faced before: shame. Because here's the problem with selling happiness. When your product gets linked to suffering, the magic collapses. Coca-Cola needed a new narrative. Fast. So they pivoted. Diet Coke, Coke Zero, Coke Light. Artificial sweeteners promised all the taste without the guilt. And for a moment, it worked. People switched. Sales held. But then came another twist. Studies suggested diet sodas might be just as bad, linked to metabolic issues, cravings, even weight gain. The backlash didn't stop. It grew louder. And for the first time in its history, Coca-Cola wasn't leading culture. It was chasing it. So they tried to go healthy. Bottled water, sports drinks, organic teas. They bought brands like Dasani, Smart Water, Vitamin Water. They plastered ads with words like hydration, balance, natural. But the red logo couldn't outrun its shadow. Because Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink anymore. It was a symbol of excess, of corporate greed, of the cost of convenience. And yet, Coca-Cola didn't die. It adapted. It survived scandals, lawsuits, health scares. It cut sugar in some markets. It launched mini cans to look responsible. It poured billions into sustainability pledges. But it never let go of the core promise: happiness. Even when happiness was killing us. That's the paradox at the heart of Coca-Cola's story. It built an empire on something simple and something dangerous. It mastered desire, then watched desire turn on it. And still it stands. More than a century after that first ad, Coca-Cola remains one of the most recognized brands on earth. Loved, loathed, consumed by billions. But survival comes at a cost. And behind the glossy ads and holiday jingles, Coca-Cola has fought, and still fights, to keep its grip on the world. In courtrooms, in parliaments, on our screens, in our minds. And now, in an age of wellness and woke consumers, the question is, can Coca-Cola reinvent itself without losing its soul? Or is the soul of Coca-Cola, the sweetness, the secret, the seduction, the very thing that will destroy it? Before we answer that, there's one more twist, one more secret, one more reason this story isn't just about a drink. It's about us, and what we're willing to believe. Because Coca-Cola didn't just sell soda, it sold a dream. And the most chilling question is, was the dream ever real? For over a century, Coca-Cola has guarded one thing more fiercely than anything else: the recipe, the so-called secret formula. Two words that turned a simple list of ingredients into legend. People have died without knowing it. Fortunes have been made protecting it. And even today, in a world of leaks and hacks, the formula remains locked in myth. The official story is irresistible. In 1919, when Coca-Cola was sold to a group of investors, the formula was placed in a vault at the Guaranty Trust Bank in New York. Only two executives knew it at any given time. They could never travel together. They could never fly on the same plane. If one died, the other had to choose a successor. It sounds like something out of a spy novel. And Coca-Cola wanted it that way. Because secrecy sells. People love a mystery. They love to believe in something they can't have. And Coca-Cola turned that human impulse into marketing gold. Ads whispered about merchandise number 7. Rumors swirled about exotic spices, secret oils, coded ingredients. Magazines published exposés claiming to have cracked the formula. None of it mattered. The myth was stronger than the truth. But here's the question: is the formula really a secret? Chemists have analyzed Coca-Cola for decades. They know what's in it, mostly. Carbonated water, sugar, caffeine, caramel color, phosphoric acid, natural flavors. The mystery lies in that last phrase, natural flavors. A mix of oils, extracts, and essences that create the signature taste. Orange oil, lemon oil, nutmeg, cinnamon, coriander, vanilla, maybe even narrowly. The exact ratios? Unknown. The magic? Intact. And then there's the twist. Even if you knew the recipe, you couldn't replicate the experience. Because Coca-Cola isn't just a formula. It's a system. The syrup, the carbonation, the temperature, the glass bottle versus the can, all of it matters. The myth matters even more. Because the real secret isn't in a vault. It's in our heads. Coca-Cola understood something profound. People don't just drink flavors. They drink feelings. Nostalgia. Identity. Belonging. That's the real recipe. And it's one no competitor can copy. In 2011, the company staged a publicity stunt. They moved the formula from a bank vault to a high-tech display at the World of Coca-Cola Museum in Atlanta. Visitors can look at a massive vault door, glowing with theatrical lights. But the paper inside, hidden, always hidden. Because the secret formula isn't about protection. It's about projection. It's about making you believe that inside that vault is magic, and that magic lives in every bottle you buy. But magic has a dark side. And as Coca-Cola clings to its secrets, the world is asking harder questions. About sugar, about health, about ethics. And Coca-Cola has answered, not with transparency, but with reinvention, with marketing, with emotion, with the same tool it used in 1886, the ad. Because in the end, that first ad didn't just launch a drink. It launched a philosophy that perception is reality, and reality can be sold. And Coca-Cola sold it better than anyone. But there's one last chapter to this story. One final question. After 138 years of promises, jingles, and billion-dollar dreams, what does Coca-Cola really mean? To you, to me, to a world drowning in choices. The answer isn't in the vault. It's in the mirror. What happens when a product stops being a product? When a logo becomes a language? when a drink becomes the belief system? That's the question Coca-Cola answered, not with theory, but with action. Because Coca-Cola didn't just sell soda. It sold rituals. It sold holidays. It sold identity so deeply embedded in our culture that for millions, it feels eternal. Think about Christmas. Before Coca-Cola, Santa Claus was inconsistent, thin or fat, dressed in green or brown, sometimes regal, sometimes stern. Coca-Cola didn't invent Santa, but it gave him the face you know, the red suit, the rosy cheeks, the twinkle in his eye, all born from an ad campaign starting in 1931. And now, that image is global. People decorate trees, hang stockings, and drink Coke, all in one seamless ritual, without realizing a corporation helped write the script. Think about war. Coca-Cola tied itself to patriotism so tightly that in World War II, drinking Coke was a symbol of freedom. It shipped bottles to soldiers across the globe, not for profit, but for permanence. When those soldiers came home, Coke wasn't just a beverage. It was a badge of loyalty. Think about pop culture. From Norman Rockwell paintings to James Bond movies, from Olympic torches to Super Bowl commercials, Coca-Cola embedded itself in the story of modern life. It didn't just ride trends. It created them. "I'd like to buy the world a Coke" wasn't just a jingle. It was a cultural anthem, a 1971 ad that sold not soda, but peace, unity, harmony. And people believed it. They sang it. They still remember it. This is what makes Coca-Cola different from almost any brand on earth. It doesn't just exist in the marketplace. It exists in the mind, in the heart, in the bloodstream of culture. It's nostalgia for a past that never truly existed. It's the illusion of happiness in 12 ounces. It's a promise that no matter how the world changes, some things will taste the same. But there's a danger in that power. Because when a brand becomes a belief, criticism feels like heresy. And Coca-Cola has used that to its advantage. When health activists attack, Coke wraps itself in tradition. When governments regulate, Coke leans on jobs, on patriotism, on choice. When consumers hesitate, Coke whispers, "Don't overthink it. Open happiness." And we obey, billions of times a day. But ask yourself, why? Why do we cling to a drink we know is unhealthy, unnecessary, and, in essence, sugar water with bubbles? Because Coca-Cola isn't selling liquid. It's selling meaning. It's selling a story. And humans will pay anything for a story, especially one that makes life feel sweeter. The question is, what does that cost us? When corporations don't just sell products, but emotions. When they shape holidays, influence politics, alter health, and do it all while smiling from billboards. Is that progress? Or is it control? Coca-Cola would say it's simple. It's just a drink. But deep down, we know better. We know Coca-Cola didn't become a $260 billion empire by being just anything. And that brings us to the final act of this story. The last twist in a tale that began with a small ad in an Atlanta newspaper. A tale that changed not just business, but us. Because Coca-Cola didn't just quench thirst. It rewired desire. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most dangerous power of all. Look at that first ad again. Simple, innocent, a few words on a page, delicious, refreshing, exhilarating, invigorating. A century later, those words read like prophecy. Because Coca-Cola didn't just deliver on those promises. It rewrote them into our DNA. But here's the truth no ad will ever print. Happiness isn't free. And every sip of Coca-Cola carries a story about power, persuasion, and the price we pay for illusions. John Pemberton thought he was making a tonic, a cure, a ticket out of pain. He died broke, his fortune sold for pennies. Asa Candler thought he was building a company. He built a culture. Robert Woodruff thought he was selling refreshment. He sold America to the world, one bottle at a time. And us? We bought it. We bought the dream. We taught it to our kids. We wrapped it in Christmas lights and patriotic slogans. We made it the soundtrack of weddings, ball games, road trips. We turned a drink into a memory, a ritual, a craving. And we never asked why. Maybe because asking ruins the magic. Maybe because deep down, we know the answer. Coca-Cola didn't sell happiness. It sold a feeling we were already chasing and charged us for every sip. But feelings fade. Science doesn't. And science says sugar kills. Obesity, diabetes, heart disease. The very drink that promised life now whispers death. And yet, we keep drinking. Why? Because logic loses to longing. Because branding beats biology. Because Coca-Cola isn't in the bottle. It's in the mind. And that's the genius and the horror of it all. The real secret formula wasn't caramel and caffeine. It was psychology. It was myth. It was the art of making you believe that opening a bottle was opening joy itself. That happiness comes in red and white. So what's the price of happiness? For Coca-Cola, billions in profit. For us, that's harder to measure. A planet drowning in plastic. Health systems buckling under sugar's burden. Generations wired to equate consumption with comfort. A culture where pause and refresh really means pause and obey. Does that make Coca-Cola evil? Not exactly. Coca-Cola didn't invent desire. It exploited it. It packaged it. It taught the world that feelings can be bottled, branded, and sold. And that's a lesson every company learned. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, different products, same playbook. And here's the haunting part. We let it happen. Because we wanted the story more than the truth. Because the truth tastes bitter and Coke tastes sweet. So where does that leave us? Maybe right back where it started, with a choice. Not between Coke and Pepsi. Between illusion and awareness. Between the happiness they sell and the happiness we make. The next time you see that red logo, remember this. It's not just a drink. It's a century of persuasion staring back at you. A history of wars and whispers, sugar and slogans, vaults and vaulting ambitions. A story that began with one ad and ended up owning the world. And maybe you'll still buy it. Maybe you'll still sip. Maybe you'll still smile when the bubbles hit your tongue. But at least now, you'll know what you're drinking. Not just soda, not just sugar, but the most successful story ever sold. Because Coca-Cola didn't just change marketing. It changed us. And the question, the one that ad never asked, is this. Was it worth it?